Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another fabulous episode of the Healthcare Trailblazers podcast. This one has been on the books for quite some time, at least conceptually, even though I only think we scheduled it a little bit ago. But really excited to be sitting here today with Josh Liu. Josh is the co-founder and CEO of SeamlessMD. If you are anywhere on LinkedIn, you're probably seeing his content. We'll dive right into it. Josh, thanks for spending time today.
Mendel, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So let's dig into your recent content. We talked about this briefly offline on our last chat together, but I think you've been putting out some really, really good content on kind of retroactive mistakes that you guys have made, specifically in the sales arena, and kind of targeting maybe the wrong type of client. And it's so refreshing, and that's why I think you've gotten such amazing feedback to see that kind of content, because there's this game that startups have to play where it's like, you got to get the flashy, you got to get the big logos, and no one talks about often the cost that comes at, and often where it's just not the right move for you. So I guess my question is, that was a lot of statement. My question is, how's that journey been? And like looking back now, and like, what was kind of the trigger to be like, wow, this has come far enough that now you can look back and you can start putting out that kind of content?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that, before getting into building a venture in healthcare, you often look at things through the lens of being a consumer on the outside. So as a consumer on the outside, you think a lot about like the Mayo Clinics, the Cleveland Clinics, all the major brands, the big academic centers. And so you think that a lot of what happens in healthcare is shaped by those major brands. But I think when you actually have to start building in healthcare and you see how long it takes to get adoption, you start to figure out actually what helps us as the venture most is to find a partner who can actually be nimble, adopt quickly, focus on the innovation. And we end up figuring out, which I think a lot of folks figure out, that it's often really the smaller, nimbler community health systems that don't have a million research or innovation projects going on that can actually focus and just want to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And so I think actually what's funny, sometimes I'll joke internally that, hey, if we actually have not heard of that health system before, I kind of get more excited because I feel like they'll be even more focused on what we want to do.
Yeah. And that's I think extolling the virtues of the smaller ones, but there's also the downside of the big ones. And I literally I spoke to someone from Mayo Clinic earlier this week or last week, and he basically just told me straight up, we are not going to work with anyone unless we're invested in them. And that's because we understand what was the term he used? He said like the Mayo Clinic, like bravado, I don't know, whatever word he used of like, we know who we are and we know how to throw our weight around and we know like what that means. And so like, and I get it from a health system perspective, that might be the right approach for you, but that really often makes you the exact opposite of the right person for a startup to try to partner with. Because when you come in with that attitude, you come with a lot of expectations and you kind of make it really, really, really difficult to actually work with. So I guess looking back, like, can we break it down maybe, because you've done this on text, but maybe we could break it down to like, what would you say are like the top 5 or 3 or whatever like, what are those top 5 mistakes that you see early founders make when they're trying to sell into health systems?
Yeah, so I think one we talked about already, which is we go after the big guns that we think are going to be kingmakers for the industry, when in fact I think the smaller, more nimble organizations are often the best partners. I think another one would be we often don't validate if this is a problem that folks are desperate to solve. So, there are a lot of solutions folks want to build in healthcare that are vitamins, like they help patients, they help care teams, but unless they are true painkillers that a customer is desperate to solve, they'll take the meeting, they'll get excited in the conversation, and they never hear from them again just because they don't really have a priority to, solve that problem that your product helps with. And so I think it's about being laser focused on, is there a real customer who desperate, I use the word desperate because they have to be desperate to solve it right now. I think that's one of the most common mistakes I see startups make. when they're trying to figure out product market fit for the first time. Trying to think of some other ones. I think in my world for the health system space, a lot of innovators don't realize how important it is to actually fit into the clinical workflow. And so we just think that if we build great technology, the clinicians will reorient their workflow to make the technology function, when in fact, in many ways, you have to make the technology fit into the existing workflow, because the current workflow is there for a reason. Like, people don't want to break it. Like, the whole system is like on the edge of breaking any time. So they don't want to tweak what they do day to day. And so if you can slide into that, it's way more effective. I
want to double click on that one for a second, because it really is one of those blinders that I think founders have. Because you're like, I don't understand. You are working in a bakery and you're slicing bread all day, and you're slicing bread with a bread knife. And I just built a machine that you can put the entire loaf in and it'll cut the entire thing for you instead of you manually going slice by slice. Why would you not use that? Like, it does not make sense to me. But the reality is, like, yeah, that's beautiful that that's your perspective. But on the other side of that is a guy working in a bakery that is just, he's got 14 million other things to do. This is the thing he knows. It's the thing he does well. He actually is really quick with the knife because he's done it a million times. And is it technically maybe the best, most optimized workflow? No, but he doesn't have that same blinder that you have on. He's got a much wider vision,
Well, to your point, if he's super effective with the knife, and he doesn't view it's an actual problem to be solved, like, why does he care to optimize, how he cuts? And his bigger problem might be, I don't know, not enough ingredients or something else. And if you solve that problem, you'd have a deal. But if you're just like trying to sell the knife that he doesn't want, you're totally right.
Which actually brings, I think, maybe the fourth point that I've seen you write about, which is you've got to make sure, and this is tricky because often these things can almost be contrary to each other or in opposition of one another, which is that you want to fit into the clinical workflow. You want to make sure that your end user, you really understand that they need your product. But then you also talked about in some of your posts, if I recall correctly, how you also have to make sure that from a financial perspective, you're actually solving something on the executive level where they're actually going to sign the contract. So maybe talk about that one a little bit.
Yeah, one of my most disappointing stories, and this happened at least twice, where we found a clinical champion at a hospital and they said, hey, if you just help us reduce readmissions in half, trust me, the hospital leadership team will buy into this, they'll pay for it and support it long term. And so we spent 6 to 12 months doing a pilot. We'd reduce readmissions in half. We get all excited, and then we would get an opportunity to meet with the hospital CEO, co-present the results, and fully expecting them to say, oh, this is awesome, we're going to buy this.
The champion, with the internal peeps.
Correct. The internal champions are there, and the CEO and other leaders in the room. And the hospital CEO says, hey, Josh, these are amazing results. This is clearly great for patient care. But given how we're paid right now, we're not incentivized to cut readmissions in half. And so there's no actual financial ROI. And it was shocking because as a consumer, as a patient, I always thought, hey, if we improved outcomes, and I had this champion saying that if we do, for sure you'll buy it, that did not match reality. And so a big learning to your point was you can trust what staff say, you can trust what the clinical champions say, but you have to trust and then validate it with other stakeholders like the executive team. And by the way, it goes both ways, right? Like, we could have sold something to a hospital CEO, and she might say, oh, trust me, the clinicians will be on board. And then if you then present it to the clinicians, they might say, no, actually, that won't fit my workflow, or like, I don't think that's a problem to solve. And then even if you sold the product, it would just fail in implementation. So you have to get that validation across the board.
Dude, I love this. I think I'm going to I think this is worth a video on for itself. We're like, you have to talk, like, those are two critical pieces that both have to be in play. It can't be an either or. You need to fully understand, fully communicate to the executives why this is financially, why this is a financial need. Or maybe I'll go a step further. You don't need to communicate to them. It has to be obvious to them that this is a financial priority. And then you also have to have a perfect understanding of the end user, that this is going to be an actual part of their workflow that they'll actually use. And you can't do one without the other. Like both of those things.
And the value props are going to be different for both stakeholder groups. The key is that you have to actually go and validate it. I mean, part of it too, by the way, I think in healthcare is that it is very much a long game. Like when I think back to lots of different customer partners over the years, it's not uncommon that someone we met, 5, 10 years ago, even where it wasn't the right fit, but we had a great relationship. And then 5 years later, the organizational priorities change, or that person moves to a new organization. But because we had a 5-year relationship, we've built trust, they're like, you're the partner I want to work with. And so there's this huge long game aspect, because healthcare, I think, is so relationship based as a business that, you kind of have to be in it for the long haul, I think, to get the ROI of all the years you did at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. I could not agree with that more. It is all about people. I had one of my first, one of the first people I worked with, like at the beginning of my career, he used to say this all the time. People don't do business with companies; they do business with people. And you have to. It's all about those relationships. I think that, to your point, healthcare is maybe even more unique, and not unique in that regard, but very, very much agrees with that kind of statement. Because maybe in like the SaaS world, maybe not so much. It's more about the tool. Like, hey, I like this tool. I don't like this tool. In healthcare, it's all about who you know. It's all about the relationship.
Well, I'll tell you. So like when I reflect back, one of the fascinating things is if you're going through, let's say, a competitive process between vendors, very often you get compared based on things like a feature matrix, right? And so the customer thinks that they're picking you based on the product. But then when I ask the customer later, let's say a year or 2 years on the line, hey, like, what's your favorite thing about SeamlessMD? The answer is never, oh, I love feature A or feature B. The answer is almost always, I love the team, I love the people, I love the service. And so even though most people end up caring about the partnership, the people, the relationships, the reliability, that's not actually how they pick the vendor. And that's partially because it's hard to maybe judge that up front. But it's fascinating to me that the things they actually care about are often not at all what, why they picked the product in the first place.
Yeah.
This content is brought to you by Careco. I know you've never seen an ad on this show before, but we are so excited. We just launched Careco. We've been working on it for the past year and a half. Careco is an AI co-pilot for care coordinators. We reduce burnouts and increase efficiency by over 40% by only taking the parts of a care coordinator's workflow that are annoying and can be done better by technology, and empowering the care coordinator to do more for their patients as a human. We look at it as we're building the brain to amplify the heart. So if you're involved in care coordination at all, please go check out careco.ai. That's our new website. We're really excited about it and hope to see you over there.
You see that also in like the way that clients communicate, or how you communicate with clients about like feedback and suggestions, or like even if something's not the best, like when you're there, you're working with them and you're like, I love this idea. This belongs on our roadmap. Here's where it belongs on our roadmap. This is where, the reaction is beautiful. Like, great, happy to hear that, and so it doesn't even mean that you have to just like do everything that clients want immediately and just make it happen. It's more about that relationship and taking them seriously, and also sometimes maybe being honest and saying like, I totally get that, appreciate it. That's too far away from who we are as a company, so that's probably not something we're looking to solve for in the foreseeable future. But yeah, just that communication, like that, yeah, I agree.
By the way, to your point, that honesty, I think we found, is so valued by customer partners. Like, I think early on, when you're less experienced, you think customers just want to hear yes all the time. They want to be satisfied. But then over time, like, we realize, no, actually, they just want to have an honest partner that they trust. So if you just keep saying yes and then you under-deliver, that is far worse than just being candid, saying, no, this doesn't match our roadmap, or like, hey, honestly, like, it's on the roadmap, but probably not for another year. Like, they'll respect the truth. They may not like it, but they'll respect it. They'll trust you because you were honest.
Yeah. Like, people also, they read through yes people very quickly. It's almost like, I always tell waiters, and I think it's like a common knowledge with waiters, but the good waiters, they always, like, if I was a waiter, I'd come up to a table and they'd say, what are your recommendations? And the first thing I would say is, I don't recommend this. Or maybe not the first thing, but like, or at least be honest, or it doesn't have to be the first thing, but like, at least be honest when the customer's like, oh, like, what do you think about this? Honestly, it's not my favorite dish. I think it's a little bit too this. Now every recommendation you make after that is like absolutely trusted. I actually, now that I'm saying that, I feel like I like listened to this in a book where someone was saying like a waiter that like made just tons of like totally top the charts every night, and basically that was his strategy. And then he would sell them like some ridiculously expensive bottle of wine, because now it's just like, yeah, this is what I think. Now like they're sold, they're bought it. So.
No, you're totally right. I remember thinking, I think a few months ago, I was at a restaurant, we were asking for like recommendations, and the answer was, oh, everything's good.
Exactly.
And I'm like, okay, well, like
nothing's good. You work here.
That's not possible.
You probably don't even eat here. You probably have never tasted a dish at this restaurant. You're probably going to Subway for lunch and you've never eaten here. That's what you think, And
I love it. I love it. It kind of reminds me how of like, like if you make a mistake as a company and working with the customer, no customer expects you to be perfect. But when you make a mistake and then you own up to it and you address it quickly and responsibly, that actually increases the trust, even though you made a mistake, because they go, oh, wow, like now I know if anything ever goes wrong, they'll be honest, they'll fix it. And because they know they're not perfect too. It's kind of like in healthcare, like mistakes happen, like unfortunately, like it might be a bad outcome for a patient. But I think also like, between a patient and a care team, like when do lawsuits happen? It's when there's often a breakdown in communication. It's, hey, like they didn't tell me there was a complication or a problem. They didn't explain to me like that, like why this happened. But if a problem happens and you're honest, like often the patient is like, yeah, I mean, it sucks. I wish this didn't happen, but you were honest. You explained it. I'm disappointed, but I'm not going to go out and sue my doctor now because I felt like you cared and you tried to fix it.
Right. Yeah. Like the relationship, and like, this is like a thought I've actually been thinking through like often recently, how the underlying current, like the current underneath most things, is intentionality. What I mean by that is like in any business deal, in any relationship, in exactly what you're talking about, which is a relationship, the underlying current that's actually deciding the direction is, what do I think your intention is? And so like in business, for example, if you think that the other person is trying to screw you, then every single thing is going to be a big deal. Every piece of a contract is going to be looked through, 100 times, and nothing's going to go well. And the opposite, if you trust that other person, you're like, I think this person has my best interests in mind, then all of a sudden the view on everything is different. Like everything. It's like, that's why it's so important to just have that figured out. Like if you don't, the trust. And so coming back to your point, like, yeah, if the patient feels that the doctor cares and the doctor has their best interests at heart, and the doctor, then they're going to understand that humans are humans and people make mistakes, and but the second there's like a feeling of like, oh, this doctor doesn't care about me, I'm just another number, and because I'm another number, the doctor didn't care enough to do XYZ, and because of that, this and this happened, boom, it's over.
I mean, actually, when you think about like Rate MDs or any of those like rating websites for patients about their healthcare experience, I mean, sometimes it's about, like a mistake was made, but most often it was really about communication experience. It's like they didn't treat me well. Yeah, they rushed me. They weren't kind to me, and it's like it has nothing to do with actual like technical competency as a clinician or a care team. Yeah, it's about just how you made the patient feel. Yeah, which I guess is in some ways as important as, are you actually delivering good care? It's like, are you treating the patient well so they actually come back, they actually follow their care plan and all these other things?
Yeah, I think probably to your point, I think, and I've said this in the past, I maintain this position that I think probably the easiest improvement to the healthcare experience with probably the highest ROI is just figuring out how to have a communication system that tells patients when their doctor is going to be in the room or in the ER when they will actually be seen. And to me, it's like, amusement parks have figured this out. They can tell you how long you'll be on the line. Airlines have figured this out. You get immediate notifications to your app if your thing is a minute delayed, whatever's happening. Like, even if it's a bad, like to your point, even if it's a bad outcome, like even if your flight is getting really delayed or really canceled, the experience has gotten so much better once you have that in your app, which is an improvement over the last couple of years. I mean, just a few years ago, these airlines did not have very well working apps, and you still have to like either go online or you're looking at the big board in the airport and like you're trying to figure things out. Like those instant notifications, the texts, here's what we're doing now we're boarding, now we're this, now we're that. Like that has improved things so much. I don't know why that hasn't been figured out in healthcare yet. Because I think that just that communication, like your doctor is going to be 37 minutes. Okay, now I know I need to sit here for 37 minutes. But if I don't know, it's like your doctor will be here any minute. And I'm just alone in a room and I'm just twiddling my thumbs. I don't know if this is going to be 2 hours. I don't know if it's going to be 10 minutes. I have no idea. It's a killer, you know?
So I grew up in the Canadian healthcare system and, in a completely like publicly funded system. There's no competition for patients from the healthcare organizations and the providers. So, a patient belongs to a certain region. If you're a hospital or, a clinical group, there's a shortage of clinicians in the first place. So you basically, get as many patients as you can take in a certain region. And you're not trying to grow your practice. You're not trying to like grow your quote unquote market share. And so because there's a lack of competition and patients often can't really choose where they get care, there's a lack of incentive, at least in Canada, to actually improve that consumer experience. So it's like, hey, if we don't set better expectations on wait times, what are you going to do about it as a patient? Nothing. Unless you leave the country, you actually have no other option. And so when there's no motivation to care, like at least in Canada, that's why we won't see innovation on that, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think you'll probably really enjoy this episode. I had this guy on a while back. His name is Shanil Ibrahim. He's a partner at Deloitte, Canada, but he's like you would think he's like in the government, like in the healthcare administration. It was a really fascinating kind of topic of back and forth between like the differences and the changes that are happening, because Canada is at a brink. Like it is going to break the healthcare system. It's gotten to this crazy point. Too many people, not enough resources. There's, like to your point, there's not enough incentive to actually doing it. Like I lived in, so I think I told you live in Toronto, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I lived in Toronto for like, I don't know, 10, 15 years. I had no idea. I mean, it just wasn't relevant to me. So I didn't really care to know, but I had no idea that it is illegal to have a private practice. That's very different than that's very different than saying, government funding only goes to healthcare. And then it's like, oh, and you are not allowed to care for anyone and take money. Like, I was like, oh my goodness. Okay. So yeah, obviously the incentive structure is off.
But I don't know if you saw some of the photos recently where, like if a new family practice clinic just opens up, there have been cases where like you see like patient lines lining up to see if they can get a spot, because I think something like 20% of the population doesn't have a primary care provider. And so we literally have like lines outside on sidewalks hoping they can get a spot in that roster. And I don't think that happens in the US at all, right? In fact, in the US, you're probably trying to compete to get that next patient. So the great thing about Canada is like healthcare is for the most part free. Like that is actually the best part of healthcare here.
But aren't those things correlated?
Like things are free, but so supply is limited, but everything's free. Yeah.
No, but it breaks down the whole structure from the top down of like, and I'm not saying we have it perfect. You and I both know we both have, podcasts in the space. We talk to a lot of people. I mean, the central theme of this is trying to move people more towards value-based care. So we're definitely not perfect, but at the end of the day, when you just have something for free up at the top, the entire incentive structure is just not aligned with any kind of, like at every layer and every level. It just, just doesn't really matter.
And even with, if you look to our acute care, like our hospitals, they're generally like given like paid on global fee structures, and they have, let's call it, not so much quotas, but caps for how many, let's say, procedures that they can do. So it's like, hey, you can only do so many, heart surgeries per year in this region. If you hit that number, like that's the most you can actually do. That's the most you're paid to do in a given year. Whereas in the US, you might be like, hey, like we're trying to grow market share. Let's get more cases done. Let's optimize, the surgical wait times.
Right.
So in some ways, like, revenue incentives actually drive access. Like it's true.
Yeah. When done correctly. So speaking of Canada, it's kind of unique that you most people wouldn't know you're from Canada just by seeing you on LinkedIn because your market is really the US. Have there been any unique parts to your founder experience by kind of coming from Canada or being in Canada, but then building for a US population?
Yeah, just for clarity, so we actually serve both countries. So about half our business is in Canada, about half is serving customers in the US. So we have the fortune or misfortune of having to work to understand both ecosystems. But we did start in Canada in terms of like trying to sell the product. And then what's interesting was that for the first several years, we had very little traction in Canada because the incentives weren't in our favor for adopting a product that improved patient outcomes. And then starting around 2016 or so, we started serving hospitals and health systems in the US, and we got much better traction there. And then what actually happened in 2020 was a bit of a reversal where in 2020, a lot of health systems in the US started getting into the red financially. And that made it harder for us to sell in the US. But then in Canada, the governments actually started funding more digital health to help hospitals clear the backlog caused by the pandemic, get more patients through surgery and other conditions. And so all of a sudden we had more incentives in Canada to, buy our product. And so it's just been fascinating to see how like actually in some ways playing in both countries helped us as a company, because when one wasn't doing so well, the other market actually got better. Now it's kind of stabilized in both. But it was kind of funny to we had to evolve the go-to-market based on like which market was better the last decade.
Was it not difficult at all to break into the US market? Were there no kind of barriers, or was it just the same? Like, is there a border between relationships on both sides or no?
No, I mean, to be honest, like when we first started, it was funny because a lot of folks told us, hey, if you don't have a US headquarters, or if people just know that you're Canadian, like US health systems will not buy from you because, they just may not trust Canadian, built products. And that could be from the truth over the years. Like actually a lot of folks who just for a reason like Canada were like, oh, you're Canadians? Like, that's really neat, right? And so actually like it was never a barrier. It actually sometimes actually helped us. I think the hard part was a lot of things that we learned about the Canadian healthcare system in terms of reimbursement models and incentives didn't translate to the US. So having to learn a different, payment model, a different insurance system, and not having grown up in that, like there was a bit of a learning curve there. I think that's what made it harder at the start. Mm-hmm. But everything else was actually, in some ways better.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So let's actually take a step back now that usually we do this at the beginning, but we've given a little context. What is SeamlessMD for those that are unaware, and what does it do?
Yeah, so the analogy I like to use is travel. So imagine you're driving from point A to point B. In the past, you had paper maps, and now we have GPS. It's faster, safer, and better. And what struck us was that for a patient journey, let's say you're going through a surgery or a cancer journey, that's far more complex than travel. But we typically give patients paper and verbal instructions, which they forget, they lose, they find hard to follow. And then the healthcare team feels like they're sending a patient into a black hole, especially outside the four walls of the hospital, where they have no idea if you're on track, they have no idea if you're doing well. And so the idea with SeamlessMD was, well, what if we could give every patient a GPS to help them navigate through a healthcare journey like a surgery or a cancer journey? So the way the product works is, we sell it to hospitals and health systems, and they provide patients with a customized experience on their phone, their tablet, or just through the browser. And it navigates them through that journey. So they get reminders of, when to stop their blood thinners before their surgery, when to stop eating or drinking. Let's say after their surgery, they would get education and videos on how to rehab and recover. And then very importantly, patients can track symptoms and health status. So when they go home after a surgery, they're tracking their pain, their vitals, they take photos of their incision. And then we have dashboards that can be embedded inside the EHRs where care teams can get alerts so they can monitor how you're doing and catch problems earlier. And so we've helped health systems roll this out across everything from like orthopedics to cardiology to women's health to oncology. And we've helped them lower length of stay, readmissions, mortality, cost of care. And so we're increasing the patient experience, we're improving outcomes, and we're keeping costs down as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And a lot of people, there's a hot debate around the senior population when it comes to tools like this in digital health. What does your practical real data tell you about the adoption rate of a tool like this in a senior population?
So I can tell you, I think 10 years ago, when we started this, the smartphone penetration in the North American population was around 50%. And so I can actually, looking back, understand why folks were skeptical. Now it's north of 90% in terms of just general, let's say, smartphone adoption, not even including other, web and other channels. But I would say for us, our median adoption among patients is 75%. Among our highest performing health system partners, it's often north of 90% patient adoption. And actually, we do serve a lot of elderly populations as well. And so I think that we found or figured out over the years a certain playbook that's really helped drive adoption, especially with older, frailer patients. It's a combination of, being multi-channel, so not just on mobile, but also on web, also by text, by email. It's about engaging the family. So a lot of our patients have a spouse, a son, or a daughter actually either use the program with them or on their behalf. Mm-hmm. It's being supportive of multiple languages and translations. It's making sure everything's at the grade 6 reading level. And so it's taken us over a decade to basically figure out a playbook on both the tech and the non-tech side to really drive up adoption. And I think the last piece is we are obsessed with the data. So we are constantly monitoring for our health system, customers, how is enrollment of patients going? How is engagement going? Yes, they have dashboards, but we actually report back to them directly saying, hey, we've been monitoring the data. These specialties look really good. Hey, why are these specialties decreasing the adoption? Can we help you troubleshoot it? So we are super proactive as a partner to, help improve that. And so I think one of the things I've learned is that really the partnership actually starts at the sale, but it never ends, because one of our mantras is until we deliver value on engagement and outcomes, the job's not done. The job is not done at go live. The job may be done once we achieve results, but in some ways the job is never done because we're always trying to increase the goal. It's great, your enrollment hit 80% this year. Can we do 85% next year of patient adoption? And that's us pushing it, not the customer even.
And so do you look at it as a per patient engagement, or is it per episode engagement, like a post-op or something like that? How do you look at that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we look at it more on episodes because, to your point, it's not uncommon that a patient, 1 year gets their joint replaced, and then unfortunately the next year they're going through a cancer journey. That can happen. So we look at it more as episodes or journeys.
Yeah, that's smart also, because I'm sure you're tying that right back to prevention and lower utilization, and being able to say okay, statistically, without this intervention, X amount of patients would have maybe not done X follow-up, or maybe fall in or something like that.
Totally.
That's fair.
Part of the learning too is that we ended up being very proactive at getting our customer partners to do analyses of outcomes and measure ROI. Because one of the things that we found was that it would just take too long to get the data. Mm-hmm. So now, as soon as, let's say, 100 patients go through the experience, we'll actually encourage the customer and say, hey, why don't we do an analysis of the results so far so that you can see early on, are we achieving value? And if we're not, now we have time to course correct. But if we wait a whole year to go by and then figure out, wait, we haven't improved outcomes as much as we want, why didn't we check this earlier?
Yeah.
And so it goes back to I think being proactive as a partner takes effort. Yeah. But actually it's an investment in the success of the partner or the customer partner.
Yeah. So maybe you have some advice for me on the Careco side. We're going through this right now. We're we've been able to prove, let's say, 40% increase in efficiency for folks, right? And that would mean that we can add, let's say, 50 to 100 patients on their caseload without them getting burnt out, whatever, right? Let's say. The problem is what if you're doing that for a client that doesn't have more patients to enroll? So like they're seeing the gains, but it's very difficult to get that measurable data. Do you have anything like that in the SeamlessMD experience, or is it just very clear like what you're
It's a great question, because I think so for us, like working with hospitals, like so many are, at bed capacity, that helping them actually get patients home sooner and stay healthy out of the hospital. Like there's not a shortage for most of our customers to fill that bed with a new patient. I think in your case, I'm trying to understand, it's like, hey, if I can make you more efficient and free up your time, what are you now doing with that time instead?
Right.
Is it that you are now doing other things that are still valuable, even if it's not managing more patients? Or is it that, hey, actually, you don't need as many care managers, so we've actually, cut your OpEx and you're actually more efficient? Like that would be the other side of it. It's like, okay, you don't need more time, but you don't need as many people.
Yeah.
Care managers might not like that, but
right. No, we try to look at it as like, look, most of the time in any good operation, at the end of the day, across healthcare, we don't have a people problem. We don't have a patient problem. We have a people problem, right? So there's always going to be more patients than people. And I think what's an interesting pattern with a couple of these types of clients is that they technically have, or like they think they have contracts worth like more patients, but then to actually ramp them up and get them through the door, and maybe they're not as good as they think that they are with kind of that success rate.
Well, then the question is like, as part of your partnership, do you have some sort of offering where you help them ramp that up, and maybe you have to help re-engineer their day-to-day to do that?
Yeah,
may or may not make sense for you to be part of that, but it might be something that you do because it ends up being good for them, good for you.
Right. No, it's a good idea. Yeah. Anyway, not to digress the conversation, but appreciate the insight. So, I mean, it's so you've been doing this for 7 years. How long has it been?
No, 12 years.
12 years. Wow.
Yeah, I'm an old guy in this space. Yeah.
So, okay. Looking back 12 years ago, did you have any expectation of how? Because it seems like you guys are in a really good spot now. You guys are, you've got really good business, and looking back when you started, what were kind of your projections against reality, essentially, for the growth of the business?
Yeah, I mean, look, honestly, I remember back then, like going through the typical kind of startup pitch stuff. Everyone was looking for like a hockey stick curve, and so you just plug numbers to Excel until it looked like a hockey stick curve. I mean, looking back now, it's kind of outrageous. But I think what ended up happening was, we never knew how long we would survive. And so I think the exciting thing about building a startup is that like every milestone you get to that you never thought you'd get to it's like you climb one mountain and you figure one thing out. And if you can do that, you've earned the right to look to the next mountain. So for example, like I like to think about our company evolution as like just proving that we could figure one stage out. So like stage one was, okay, we had, 3 founders at the beginning. Could we even work together and not just explode? And then like stage 2 would be, hey, can we like build an MVP product that a hospital would be willing to try, even though it totally sucks? Doesn't have to work. Like doesn't have to actually improve outcomes, but like we actually convince a hospital to use this. It's like, oh my God, I never thought we could do that. And then like stage 3 is like, okay, can we actually get it to work and get patients using it and improving an outcome? And like, oh my God, there's actually reduced readmissions. I never thought that would happen. And then it was like, hey, do you think we could actually get some like major like academic brand to use this? Oh my God, they actually did. And then later on I was like, oh, wait, can we actually get Epic to integrate with us? And eventually that happened. And so it was like every time we would, achieve a milestone, we've just like earned the right to solve the next big problem. And that's what I love about building a startup. It's that it doesn't get easier. You get better at you figure out certain things and you get good at it. And then a new challenge happens. You're like, oh crap, now I have to like grow and figure out how to do this new thing. But that's the cool part about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that perspective. That's such a good perspective because you know what? Burnout in this regard comes from missed expectations, probably. Like that's probably a huge factor where it's like, I thought X and then it's not going as fast as I thought. That creates irritation. Irritation creates burnout where you keep doing that. Like if you're cleaning a wall and you expect it to take you 2 minutes and you just find yourself 2 hours later still scrubbing at the same spot and it's not getting any cleaner, you're going to be really frustrated, right? But if you knew that it was going to take a week because the chemical that you're using is like, then all of a sudden you're fine. You're on. So I think what you said kind of like takes out the expectation. And I really do like that because I think people are very entitled in general. And I speak for myself and for everyone, like, especially with social media and just looking at, what other people are doing. And then people feel like the world like owes them things and like that their company deserves to have X. And it's like, no one owes you anything. The world doesn't owe you anything. You're going to put a certain amount of value into the world, and the world is probably going to reflect that value by returning something back. And like, that's it. And so the mindset that you gave, where it's like, just always assume that you're probably gonna die, and then I remember there's like this artist that I was speaking with, and he said he paints every painting as if he's gonna die before he finishes that painting or something like that. Where it's like, and then every piece is like,
I mean, what you said totally resonates. Like, my big thing in life is that like nothing is given, everything has to be earned. Like, yeah, you have to get lucky every now and then, but if you're disciplined of just doing a lot of the boring stuff over and over again and putting in the work, a lot of good things will happen. Like even now, like I know a lot of companies, especially in healthcare, like they're so worried about like growth, right? Growth of revenue, growth of customers. But the one thing you can truly control is just like the inputs. So like, one of the things that we've done as a team is said, hey, like the most important thing we can do is just spend more time with customers. Like I'll even tell the team, hey, like I'm okay if you just want to visit a customer partner on site with a very limited agenda, just so you get time in the room, just ask them like how things are going, what your priorities are, what can we do better? And like so many serendipitous things happen just by spending time with customers. Like the customers say, oh, hey, like I want you to meet this new stakeholder, right? Turns out like their department could benefit from your innovation. Like, okay, well, I would not have learned that if I didn't just like go and visit a customer. Right? Or they might say, oh, hey, Seamless, like we have this new problem that we want to help solving. Do you think you could, enhance your product to solve this thing? And it's like, oh, wow, like what a gift, like feedback, just because I showed up and talked to a customer partner. And so now I say like, hey, like one of the biggest ROI things we can do is just like spend time with our customer partners. Like that's it. Just show up, talk to them.
Yeah.
Matt, sometimes nothing will actually happen, but often like more magic happens than you realize. And it's about putting the time. Like you have to go, you have to visit, you have to get on the plane. Like, you can't just sit in the Zoom and hope it comes to you.
Yeah, you summed it up really well with you can only control your inputs. I mean, it's so spot on. And the thing with luck, like you said, luck can be engineered to a very large extent. I mean, if you've got if you've got 1,000 doors and there's something behind one of those doors, or, and you have no idea, and some person is going to enter the room and kick open a door, and that's going to be the right one. And like, wow, that's amazing. And then some people are going to kick open 5 doors and then there's not going to be anything there and they're going to give up. But that one guy that just keeps kicking doors and keeps kicking doors and keeps it going and going, at some point he's going to hit a door that's going to have something, and it's like, I literally felt this when I was building up Proviva. Like I've talked about this a couple times, where it's so hard because you kind of feel like you're building in the dark and you're blindfolded and you're just feeling around for an open door. And sometimes you get a door and you open it and it's a closet and it doesn't go anywhere. But then other times you get a door and it opens into the next room. And the crazy thing mentally is that in retrospect, retroactively, it's so easy to draw the line between the things that worked. And that's where it feels like luck, because it's like, because everyone sees you in retrospect. They're like, oh yeah, of course, because you did this, because you did that. It's like, oh yeah, you're building Careco because you know Proviva, because this, because the podcast, because, and yeah, that's really easy in retrospect to look at. But when you're at level 1, you just have to be doing a giant spray and pray of actions. Like you just have to act, just do things. And some of those will move to the next step and some of those won't. And you know what? You're probably not even going to remember the 90% that don't go anywhere, but they were all critical in order to hit that one,
It's funny. It's so easy to look back now, right? And paint this amazing narrative of how we started at, point A and got to point B today. But you're right. The reality was back then, we were just like bumbling in the dark, just like throwing crap against the wall, like talking to anyone who would listen to our idea. And then the painting looks beautiful now, but you're right. It was like a mishmash of just like getting through a random maze. Can I tell you my favorite investor story? Because it relates to your point about just like you just do stuff and like you get lucky. So when we raised our seed round back in 2015, we didn't really have many connections. We weren't from the Valley. And so I basically just like cold contacted like hundreds of potential investors. And of the 130 who actually took a meeting with me, like less than 10% invested, right? So 90% plus like, rejection rate of people who actually even would meet with me. But my favorite story is I met this physician, did the pitch, and he was like, it's not for me. I'm like, cool, right? And then like a week later, he's like, hey, you know what, Josh? Like my brother's also a physician. Like I was like telling him about your company and he's kind of interested. Like, do you want to meet him? I'm like, sure. And it's funny because his subject title was like, when one door closes, another one opens. Like that was like the email subject title from him. And so I met the guy's like brother. And this is like back then, like it was on like a WebEx. No one put their cameras on. And so this guy never really truly met me beyond like a 30-minute like conversation. And he invested like 6 figures on the spot.
Wow.
And it's just totally random. And it's like, I met the guy's brother initially. I got rejected. And then like this other door opened just because, I pitched the brother. And it's like, wow, like it's just like, you never know like when things will work out. But to your point, it's like you just knock on 100 doors and like, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
And people think it's glamorous being a founder, but trust me, as I think like you're just like knocking on doors like all day long and getting rejected.
Yeah. Just clawing at things. It's like, just forcing but that, that's what they'll all say is that like the number one trait in all founders is just that relentless, just perseverance, because you will force your way out of something. Like, as long as you're also have some of those other components, like you're always learning and you're always pivoting accordingly, and you're not just like, I have one vision and no matter what the market tells me, I'm not going to listen, assuming that's not the case. But like, it does take obviously an insane amount of perseverance. And that comes back to like, they all kind of interconnect. Like that comes back to loving what you do, because, I was thinking about this yesterday, where like one of the things that I just love about Careco, like obviously we believe we have a really good shot here, because otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. But besides for the actual product, like every single person on our team is realizing the absolute fullest potential of their talents, which they've never been able to do previously in their life. And like just that itself, that means that we all just freaking love this shit. Like we're all just doing, we're just operating at the tip top of our talent. And that is such a fun thing,
Well, I love that. I think one thing I have come around though, on the whole, like, say building vitamins or stuff that the market doesn't want. If an innovator is just so passionate about what they're building and they understand the market might still not want it, I'm actually okay with that, because I'm like, you know what? Like, not every business has to be about like getting to crazy product market fit or be able to like have the growth rate of like, OpenAI or something like that. It's like, hey, if you're passionate about this problem, but you accept the market risk that like no one else might care about this, I'm actually okay. I'm like, good for you. Good for you that you believe so much that this should exist, that you're willing to like, go to bat for it, even if it's likely to fail. I'm actually okay with that in healthcare. What I'm not okay with is when folks say, hey, like, why won't the market accept this? This thing is helpful. It's like, no, you gotta understand that.
Yes,
it's a vitamin.
We talked about this a little bit. I think on the first episode of the Building Careco podcast. But like those people that end up whiny about the market, so toxic. Like that energy, I think, is so toxic. Where you're like, the Yiddish word is like fetching online about like, oh, I'm a victim here, and the market is just not accepting my brilliance. It's like, that is not how capitalism or any of this works. Like that is not how it works.
It's not.
I agree perfectly with what you said. Yes, you can be a happy small business, no problem. Hey, I know that this very, very unique type of mug is not for everybody, but I love making mugs and that's what I want to do. And great. And for those that like it, I'm happy to serve you. Those that don't, no problem. Like, sure. But not like, oh no, why is the big mug company still winning? Like,
I totally agree with you. As long as you understand that, like I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Build the custom mug.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Right
You have
on.
no,
Yeah.
you have no idea how deep that strikes. I know a lot of people like that. Yeah. Anyways, we could go on for hours. This is a lot of fun. Maybe we'll do it another time soon. But Josh, thanks for spending time. Keep crushing it with the content on LinkedIn, because it's really good for early stage founders. Like, it definitely resonates with a lot of people, including myself. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mendo. And congrats with Carco. I'm excited to see what else you do with it.
Thanks. Appreciate it.